Everyone. My name is Sharise Moore, and I am a editor. I'm an educator. I'm an author, and I am a curriculum designer. My forthcoming novel, Dr. Marvellus Djinn's Odd Scholars, will be available in early 2021, and I will be reading from one of those chapters. Dr. Marvellus Djinn's Odd Scholars is an eclectic mix of steampunk, magical realism, and alternate history. It takes place in 1920, and it's an adventure story about four teens who've been chosen to tour the theme park of a quirky magician named Dr. Marvellus Djinn. And Dr. Marvellus Djinn is a Garveyite, she is an eclectic, and she has this amazing park of mythological creatures and magic, and it is also a replica of the continent of Africa. The park is called the Motherland. So I'm going to read a chapter that I believe embodies Kujichagulia, self-determination, and it follows the character Brenda, and it takes place in Charleston, 1920. And the name of the chapter is The Kleptomaniac Inventor. After 3 grueling hours of demonstrations, the contestants finally reached the end of Charleston's juvenile ingenuity competition. A cluster of wooden tables covered with cogs, gears, screws, and other mechanical instruments formed a circle under a pavilion in the middle of the marketplace. Brenda watched in silence as Dr. Djinn inspected her latest invention in the palm of her hand. No more than 2 inches in length, the contraption had a steel outer shell with a slender glass barrel inside. Minuscule wires looped around the bottom and an inch-long syringe poked from its end. Tiny copper buttons covered the barrel's side. Brenda cracked her knuckles behind her back. "Never seen anything like it," Dr. Djinn said under her breath. "What's it made of?" 92% inox. Copper, wire, and glass make up the remaining 8%. Brenda cleared her throat. Inox is steel. It's lightweight and resistant to staining. Dr. Djinn looked in the direction of a tall man at her side with ink-black skin. He responded with a stiff nod. She turned back to Brenda. "Demonstrate." Brenda took the contraption out of the magician's palm. "It's a siphoning mechanism." Her eyes settled on a jar dangling from the man's belt. Now and again its contents would bubble and flash, as if possessed by some unseen force. She motioned toward it. "May I use the jar?" Gasps and chatter tore through the gathering. The man's eyes grew wide. "Only a taint," he swallowed before continuing. "Only a taint. Someone with magic blood can properly handle the contents of a soul jar," he began. "This is an ingenuity competition, Professor Blue." Dr. Djinn rubbed her palms together. "If anything goes wrong, we can deal with it. Let's see what she can do." The professor stared at Dr. Djinn through narrowed eyes. "Very well, but we must protect our potential scholars at all costs. We both know what's inside that jar." His West Indian lilt floated through the thick Charleston air as he lifted the clasp on his belt. Brenda watched as he sat it on the table in front of her. The audience crept forward, tightening around them. With the utmost care, Brenda balanced her invention between her thumb and index finger and mashed one of the buttons on its side. A tiny blue flame emanated from the syringe, gradually penetrating the glass. The jar rattled and screeched. Out of the corner of her eye, Brenda could see Professor Blue reaching for it as Dr. Djinn blocked his efforts. After the syringe cleanly broke through the glass, Brenda pushed another button. Instantly, the mucus-like substance from the soul jar filled the glass barrel. With a subtle click, the syringe retracted, and the tiny opening in the jar closed like a healed wound. Brenda reached for the glass barrel, now filled with demonic fluid. The barrel is heat and cold resistant. You can use it to inject or draw out poison or any substance you like. She held the barrel up high. "I call it a fire needle." Dr. Djinn tipped her hat, bright green like her tuxedo. Well done, young lady. Resounding applause and whistles rippled through the crowd as Brenda replaced the barrel inside the fire needle with a click, injected the goo back into the jar, and pushed it back toward the professor. Professor Blue reattached it to his belt loop and gave her a small smile. Impressive. Dr. Djinn raised an arm up high, silencing the chatter. Thank you all for your inventions. Each of you has mesmerized, inspired, and surprised me this afternoon. After a 1-hour intermission, I will announce the winner of the Juvenile Ingenuity Competition and our second odd scholarship. Back at her station, Brenda glanced at her stopwatch, reached for her briefcase, and dismantled her invention piece by piece. A tiny woman squeezed through the crowd and hurried toward her. A whole hour, Aunt Squeak, Brenda huffed as the woman reached her side. Patience, BB, patience. She rubbed her shoulder. Brenda frowned at the invention, now a pile of tiny cogs and screws. It shouldn't take a whole hour to make a decision. They want to make sure they choose well. The competition was top notch. Brenda turned back to her briefcase and pushed a button on its side. The case popped open to reveal a slew of flaps, snaps, and drawers. Tiny lights blinked off and on in a strange rhythm. After she unzipped the felt-lined pocket, she scraped the parts of the fire needle inside. Your uncle loved that briefcase. Aunt Squeak stared at the contraption with a longing in her eyes. Brenda nodded. She opened another drawer. Ultraviolet rays hummed from inside. Seeing you here and doing such a fantastic job. Squeak dabbed at her eyes with a lacy handkerchief. I know. Uncle Rufus would be proud. She sighed. Squeak stuffed the kerchief in her purse. Sure would. You were fantastic, baby. Imagine a fully funded education at the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. She pulled a newspaper clipping from her purse and gently unfolded the tiny squares. Take a look. Read it. For extra motivation, she grinned. Brenda turned from the briefcase and peered at the newspaper clipping. The Negro World. Dr. Marvellus Djinn, The Motherland and Resistance. May 1st, 1920. Though the grand opening of the Motherland is less than 60 days away, the national buzz surrounding it is a potent reminder of the intrigue of its creator, Dr. Marvellus Djinn. The nation was introduced to Dr. Djinn when she worked as an assistant to the incomparable magician Black Herman in the early 1910s. After setting off on her own in 1915, she amassed a fortune selling tonics and talismans during her impressive traveling one-woman magic show. In 1916, she and fellow UNIA member Professor Bartholomew Blue discussed their ideas for the Motherland with H.D. Woodson, the brilliant Negro architect of several buildings in Washington, D.C., including portions and portals of Union Station. The project broke ground with Woodson at the helm later that year. Djinn describes the park as a simmering stew of myth, history, science, magic, and suspense. Though she remains tight-lipped about the park's grand menagerie and the creatures inside, she was more forthcoming about its dedication to invention and architecture. I wanted to create a place that showcases the brilliance of innovation and the pride of our history, Djinn told the Negro World. In partnership with the Hampton Institute, Djinn is constructing an inventor's playground with state-of-the-art equipment inside the park's replica of the Eastern Rift Mountains. The Innovation Lab will serve as an incubator for the ideas of young Negro inventors and scientists. Patents will be plentiful as well as all the money needed to fund them. The Innovation Lab is set to open this fall. The Motherland is my way of giving colored folks a much-needed escape from Jim Crow, she said by phone on Monday. This park is my resistance. The Motherland's grand opening is set for June 15, 1920. For more information on a discounted ticket for bona fide UNA members, see page C12. A smile slid across Brenda's face. She could already see herself inside the lab, rummaging through cogs, screws, and gears, inventing anything she wanted with more tools at her disposal than she'd ever had. That scholarship is yours, BB. Aunt Squeak chucked her under the chin. Now let's look around. She pointed at a storefront and lowered her voice. That's a two-headed woman's shop. She jabbed her playfully in the arm. Want a reading? Aunt Squeak was from the Low Country. Initially, she downplayed those roots for Brenda's uncle, the big city man from Philadelphia she'd fallen in love with. Funny thing is, her strangeness is what reeled him in. He would have married her regardless. Uncle Rufus had told Brenda as much many times before. A shiver ran through her thin frame despite the summer heat. No thanks, Aunt Squeak. Well, suit yourself, she shrugged. She doubled back to meet her niece's eyes. Dr. Djinn is the best colored magician the world has ever seen. It's about time everyone knew your name, too. And fix that skirt. She fumbled with Brenda's hemline and gave her a once-over, licked one of her thumbs, smoothed her dark eyebrows, and stifled a groan as her aunt tugged at the thick cornrows dusting her shoulders. Squeak squinted through the sunshine, admiring her handiwork. Go on and have a look around. She raised an eyebrow. 1 hour, no funny business. We ain't in Philly. Brenda forced a smile and a nod. Yes, ma'am. The moment Squeak turned her back and moseyed toward the two-headed woman's shop, Brenda hiked up her skirt. She chuckled to herself as her aunt disappeared in the crowd. I sure hate it when they do all that fussing. Ain't no need, a voice called over her shoulder. Brenda turned to face a girl with two bushy plaits on either side of her head. She recognized the girl right away as one of her competitors. The girl stuck out a skinny arm. I'm Constance. She narrowed her eyes. Seemed to me you're in the way of me getting one of those scholarships. What Constance didn't know was her name didn't matter one bit. From the moment Brenda saw that bushy hair, she knew she'd be calling her Platts. Brenda cocked her head to the side. Brenda from Philadelphia. And the only person I ever compete with is myself. You should try it. Platts looked her up and down like she wanted to fight. And that's when Brenda caught sight of the girl's shoulder bag. Beige, brand new, and almost as big as she was. One of the clasps had secured it shut had been left open, and several crumpled dollar bills peeked from inside. Bad move, Platts. Bad move. Well, you sure did come a long way to go back home empty-handed. Platts ran her tongue across her buck teeth. You think way too much of yourself, Brenda snapped. How old are you? Platts sneered. Old enough, Brenda countered. Yeah, when I saw you, I thought you were about 12 or 13. Couldn't be no more than that. Platts placed a hand on one of her non-existent hips. Why do you care? She chuckled. You and your big city confidence. The bigger they are, leave me alone, Brenda said, annoyed. And if I don't? Platts rolled her neck in a circle. Brenda walked off, nudging Platts just enough to brush her open satchel. With one deft movement, she stuffed the bills in her pleated skirt pocket. The flawless exchange made her $3 richer. Some people deserve what was coming to them, and some were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Platts was a little bit of both. Briefcase slung across her shoulder, she headed in the opposite direction, pushing her way through the thick crowd. Cabbage Row had always been Aunt Squeak's favorite place. The maze of tents, carts, and storefronts created playful shadows in the late afternoon. She'd visited Charleston every year for as long as she could remember. She walked briskly past the pyramid of ripe peaches. A heavy-set vendor smiled in her direction. Peaches, only a nickel, fresh peaches. The moment the vendor turned her head, Brenda slipped between the two tables and swiped a ripe peach from the pile, tender and fuzzy in her palm. She took a bite as she hurried on. A river of sticky liquid dripped into the crevices of her fingers. So good. Though she'd never admitted to Aunt Squeak, Cabbage Row had become one of her favorite places as well. Haggling customers, a cacophony of odors, flowers mixed with ripe fruit and raw meat fresh from the slaughter. She gazed at the long, flowy skirts spread out over wooden tables and carts covered with perfume bottles. Fish with their heads still attached stared at her from trays overflowing with ice. A tent caught Brenda's attention. Emerald ferns sprouted from clay jars. Colorful glass bottles and bowls sat on wooden shelves. A squat container of gold mud sat beside a triangular tin filled to the brim with cobalt blue. The aroma of spice, sandalwood, incense drifted between her nostrils. She wandered toward one of the shelves. A bottle with raised indentations caught her eye. Without so much as a thought, she reached for it, mesmerized. It was like fire and ice in her palm. Her eyes narrowed. Why not? She felt lucky enough. Tonic's been in my family for years. A voice drifted over the tinkle of wind chimes. Brenda froze. Dang. She'd never been this close to being caught. What's in it? She asked, turning the bottle over in her trembling hands. Ginger, milkweed, and mint. Brings peace to an anxious mind, the voice answered. Brenda turned to face the stranger. Where she expected a face, she saw nothing but long, twisting braids adorned with silver beads. Layers of black skirts covered her from waist to ankle. She wore a white blouse, thin enough to rustle in the stingy breeze. The braids covered the left side of the girl's face like a veil, and her single visible eye was large and dark brown. Brenda blinked. The girl couldn't have been more than a year or two older than her, if that. In response, the girl returned Brenda's stare with a bone-deep gaze. It was as if she could see her birth, the thoughts in her skull, and all her fears stenciled inside a single breath. Uneasy, Brenda shifted her weight, stepped backward, and nearly knocked over a shelf. Nearly a dozen tins and bottles rattled on their shelves, tilting at dangerous angles, all threatening to tumble to the ground. The girl dove forward in time to save a rainbow-colored substance in an expensive-looking crystal vial. Brenda jostled a tin filled with glitter and 2 other bottles in her arms before placing each back on the shelf. Cheeks hot with embarrassment, she turned to leave. Want a reading? Might aid what's troubling you, the girl said as she straightened the shelf. You don't know anything about me, Brenda spat over her shoulder. I don't. But what if I could show you who you'll be in 10 years, 10 days, who you might have been in the past? She smiled. Hi, Brenda. I'm Claire. Follow me. Brenda stood as still as a statue. She hadn't given her name. Half terrified, half curious, she followed the girl toward a table and chair in the back of the tent. Claire motioned for Brenda to sit, then pulled a wooden bowl toward her. Brenda adjusted her briefcase still dangling across her middle and sat. Inside the bowl, she saw a tooth, 2 shiny pennies, a flamingo feather, and a chunk of bark from a palmetto tree. Claire filled the bowl with water. As the water rippled, an image formed. Brenda recognized it immediately. Trees with pink blossoms, a tall bell tower, horse-drawn carriages. It was Philadelphia, Center City. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, Dr. Marvellus Djinn's Odd Scholars will be available in February of 2010. If you'd like to know more about the book or about me and my writing, please visit www.bsharisemore.com. That's www.bsharisemore.com. BSHARISEMOORE.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Sharise_B and on Instagram at b.sharise and on Facebook at b.sharise.moore. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to connect with you at some time. Self-determination, Kujichagulia.